Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video we'll be covering how to create and periodize a strength and conditioning program for athletes. Before we can periodize a training program, we first need to establish a basic mesocycle that can be manipulated over time. Let's now create a mesocycle which we can periodize throughout the year later on in this video. The first step when creating a strength and conditioning program is to establish what qualities are important for the specific athlete to train. We have 7 primary qualities that we can train which can benefit athletic performance. These are linear speed, change of direction ability, plyometric training, power training, maximum strength, hypertrophy, and endurance. Not all athletes, however, will require each of these qualities to be successful in their sport. When designing a strength and conditioning program, we only need to train the qualities that are important for the specific athlete. For this video, we will use a soccer player as an example. A soccer player would require the following qualities to be successful in their sport: linear speed, to be faster on the field; change of direction ability, to be able to quickly decelerate and accelerate in a different direction; plyometrics, for its benefits on sprint and jumping ability; power training, for explosive acceleration and its ability to improve vertical jumping; maximum strength, for overall injury prevention and an increase in force production; and endurance training, so that the athlete can perform repeated high-intensity efforts for a full 90-minute match. Of these qualities, change of direction ability and endurance training will be performed during soccer practice sessions, so they don't need to be also performed during separate strength and conditioning sessions. If the strength and conditioning coach has the ability to influence practice sessions, then change of direction and endurance training can be implemented by manipulating different drills. Therefore, the qualities that will be trained for this example are linear speed, plyometrics, power, and maximum strength. Now that we've established what qualities will be trained in the strength and conditioning sessions, the next step is to structure the weeks of the mesocycle. This means that we need to determine how many weeks the athlete will perform overloading training before a deload is implemented. Ideally, this should fall in line with when the team has planned back-off weeks, but it is unlikely that the team coach will have this planned from a physiological perspective. Therefore, it must be left down to the strength and conditioning coach and the individual athletes to decide. Generally, around 3 to 5 weeks of overloading training is a good range to conduct before a deload is implemented. For this example, let's use an overload to deload ratio of 4:1, meaning that 4 weeks of overloading training will be performed before a deload is implemented. Next, we need to establish how many times per week the athlete or team will be conducting strength and conditioning sessions. This may change throughout the year, although we'll stick with a consistent number for the sake of this video. Let's say that 2 strength and conditioning sessions per week will be implemented throughout the entire year. And lastly, we need to establish what exercises will be performed on each day. Exercise selection will vary based on the time of the year, which we will get to later on in this video. However, for now we will just establish some basic exercise categories, which will be consistent throughout each phase of training. Let's have a look at this example. We can see here that each quality is being trained each day, since we only have a 2 time per week frequency. However, the emphasis of each quality on the different days varies slightly. Another consideration when programming exercises is how it will affect the following days. So if the athlete or team has a match in 1 or 2 days, then we don't want to implement exercises that will make them fatigued and sore. However, if the athlete or team doesn't have a match for multiple days, then it may be best to use the exercises which could potentially make them slightly sorer and more fatigued. In our soccer example, for linear speed training, we can see here that on day 1, maximum velocity sprinting is emphasized, while on day 2, acceleration sprinting is emphasized. This is still training linear speed, although the emphasis has been undulated on each day. Also, acceleration sprinting is predominantly concentric in nature, meaning it is likely to induce less muscle damage than maximum speed sprinting. This is because matches are usually scheduled on weekends, meaning that day 2 is probably going to be closer to a fixture than day 1. For plyometric training, day 1 uses faster plyometric training, meaning that ground contact times will be very short. Day 2 uses slower plyometrics, meaning that ground contact times are longer, but force production will be higher. This pairs up well with the linear speed training emphasis of each day. For power training, lighter loads and faster velocities will be used on day 1, while heavier loads and slower velocities will be used on day 2. This again pairs up similar qualities with the speed and plyometric training. And lastly, strength training uses higher reps with lighter loads on day 1, while day 2 uses heavier loads with lower reps. The lighter loads will induce more structural adaptations and also likely make the athletes sore. This is why the heavier loads with lower reps are placed on day 2, as they will induce more of a neural adaptation and not fatigue the athlete as much for their upcoming match. Now that we've created a basic mesocycle for the athlete, we can go through how to periodize this program to have the athlete in peak condition when they need to be. The first step is to create the annual plan. The annual plan doesn't need to plan training in detail, it simply has the role of giving us a general guideline to follow at any given time of the year. The most important part of the annual plan is the competition schedule. This is the most important factor because the competitive fixtures will dictate when the athlete needs to be in peak condition throughout the year. In this example, for a soccer player, we have inputted the competition schedules and have color-coded the matches based on importance. The darker yellow indicates more important matches where the athlete needs to perform well, while the lighter yellow indicates less important matches. We can see here that the season runs from September to April, with 3 practice matches before the beginning of the season. We can now split the year into training phases to determine when our off-season, pre-season and in-season periods will be. So we can see here that the team or athlete has a 6-week off-season after the season finishes, followed by a pre-season period and a long in-season period. This season runs over the winter period of the Northern Hemisphere, as soccer seasons are typically played during this time. We can also see here that there is a short off-season period during the last week of December and the first week of January, where no training will be conducted by the club, and no competitive fixtures will be played. We can now split each training phase into mesocycles or blocks to manage training more effectively. We can see here that each block is 5 weeks long and will consist of 4 overloading weeks and 1 deload week as established previously. The only exception is block 6 of the in-season, which is only 4 weeks long, as the competition schedule forces this adjustment. Next, we can implement testing dates to monitor the athlete's physical condition. Testing can be conducted via specific testing dates, but it can also be conducted simply through smart training. For example, sprints can be timed during speed training, and strength can be estimated using velocity tracking during training. In this example, however, we are going to implement specific dates that the athletes will be tested for the sake of this video. We can see here that testing has been implemented after a few weeks of pre-season training, at the end of pre-season, before the mid-season break, and towards the end of the season. Frequent testing can allow the strength and conditioning coach to adjust training based on how the athletes are performing during the tests. And lastly, we need to establish a peaking index. The peaking index is a general guide as to when we want the athletes to be in peak condition. They cannot be in absolute peak condition all year round, so we have to strategically plan when it is most important to perform well. In this example, a simple number system has been included where a lower number means that we want the athletes to be in better condition, and a higher number means that we are not expecting the athletes to perform at their best. We can see here that we want the athletes to be in peak condition towards the end of the season, when multiple important matches or finals may be taking place, and in poorer condition during the off-season and pre-season periods. Let's now plan the details of how the training program may look at different times throughout the year. First, let's have a look at how a mesocycle may look further from an athlete's peak. This may be in the pre-season period where the athlete doesn't need to be in peak condition and baseline physical qualities are being established. We'll use the same mesocycle structure that we created at the beginning of this video and keep this consistent for each mesocycle that we will discuss. For the linear speed exercises, we have chosen the unloaded regular sprints on day 1, which will emphasize max velocity sprinting. And on day 2, the sled push has been implemented to focus on acceleration performance. The distances increase over the mesocycle as a form of progressive overload. And in week 5, the number of sets is reduced as a deload. The sled push uses a heavy load to develop more force production qualities, as this mesocycle does not need the athlete to be in absolute peak condition. The plyometric exercise chosen is the depth jump. The depth jump requires the athlete to drop from a height and focus on jumping as high as possible. Since the emphasis is on jump height, ground contact times will be slightly longer, and force production will be slightly greater. The number of reps performed increases over the mesocycle as a form of progressive overload, and the volume reduces in week 5. Day 2 also uses an external load of 5 kilos to slow contact times even more. The squat jump has been chosen for a power exercise on both days, but the load undulates. Day 1 uses a moderate load, meaning that jump height will be slightly greater, while day 2 uses a heavy load, meaning that force production will be higher. The number of reps increases over the mesocycle, and the volume decreases in week 5 for a deload. For the strength exercises, the trap bar has been chosen as the primary strength lift, and the dumbbell bench press and seated row have been chosen for upper body accessory exercises. Day 1 uses higher rep ranges, meaning that the load lifted will be lower, while day 2 uses lower rep ranges, meaning that the load lifted will be heavier. Let's now have a look at how a mesocycle may look when the athlete or team is close to when they need to be in peak condition. In this mesocycle, the same structure has been used, but training has been manipulated slightly to have the athletes in better condition. For linear speed training, the straight sprint has been included again, but the sled push has been replaced with the sled pull. The sled pull involves faster running speeds and is more technically similar to unloaded sprint performance. The distance of both exercises have been increased slightly from the last block, allowing the athletes to reach faster speeds. The sled pull also uses a moderate load rather than a heavy load, again allowing faster running speeds. Hurdle jumps have been chosen as a plyometric exercise, as this will involve shorter ground contact times and is more specific to sprint performance. Day 1 uses no load, while day 2 uses an external load of 5 kilos, as was seen in the previous mesocycle. The squat jump remains the same as a power exercise, although the loads have been decreased. Day 1 uses a light load, while day 2 uses a moderate load. This will increase jump velocity and will likely have higher transfer to jump and sprint performance. And the strength exercises have remained the same, although the rep ranges have decreased, meaning that heavier loads can be used. This will allow higher forces to be produced and will have greater effects on physical performance. Finally, let's now have a look at how a mesocycle may look when the athlete needs to be in absolute peak condition. In this mesocycle, the most specific training methods have been implemented to have the highest transfer to physical performance. The linear speed exercises remain the same as the last block, although the distances have increased, allowing the athletes to reach maximum speeds. The sled pull uses a light load in this mesocycle, which will be more specific to unloaded sprinting. Bounds have been chosen as a plyometric exercise, as this exercise will involve very short ground contact times. This will place a very high emphasis on the stretch shortening cycle, which will have higher transfer to sprint performance. The loading has still been undulated each day as a form of variation. The squat jump still remains as the power exercise, although the loading has again decreased from the previous mesocycle, allowing faster movement velocities and higher jump height. This is more specific to jumping and sprinting performance and will have higher transfer. And lastly, the strength exercises remain the same, but the rep ranges have again decreased, This will mean that heavy loads can be used and force production will be maximized. This mesocycle should allow the athletes to be in peak condition for their sport. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you got something out of this video. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already.